The porch light flickered against the November cold as Sarah Mitchell peered through the curtain. 47 motorcycles lined her quiet suburban street in Bloomfield, Indiana, their chrome-reflecting streetlights like a river of steel. Her hands trembled as she counted them. 1, 2, 10, 20, losing track as more engines rumbled into view. She was 3 months behind on rent. Her 8-year-old daughter, Emma, needed heart surgery she couldn't afford, and now this, leather-clad strangers outside her door at dusk on a Tuesday evening. She hadn't asked for help. She'd learned long ago not to expect it. The world had taught her that survival meant silence, that asking was weakness, that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. But when she opened the door, the man at the front removed his helmet slowly, deliberately. Grey streaked his beard like silver wire. A scar ran along his jawline from ear to chin, the kind earned in combat, not barroom brawls. His eyes held something she hadn't seen in years, recognition mixed with purpose and an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Sarah Mitchell?" His voice was rough, weathered by years and cigarettes, but careful, respectful. "Daughter of James Mitchell, United States Army, 4th Infantry Division stationed at Fort Hood." Her breath caught in her throat. Her father had been gone 22 years, killed in a training accident at a forward operating base in Iraq when she was 9 years old. She'd been eating cereal when the officers came to the door. She remembered the milk turning pink from the strawberries, remembered her mother's scream, remembered how the world had simply stopped turning. She nodded, unable to speak, her voice trapped somewhere between her heart and her throat. The biker extended a weathered hand, calloused from years of working steel and keeping promises. "My name is Marcus Cole. Your father saved my life in April of 2003. Maybe promised something before he died." He paused, his jaw tight with emotion, his eyes glistening in the porch light. "I'm here to keep that promise. If you want to know what promise changed everything, keep watching." Behind Marcus, dozens of bikers stood in military formation, men and women of all ages, their patches reading Iron Covenant MC with a hammer and shield emblem. They weren't a gang, they weren't an outlaw club. They were a family bound by honor, loyalty, and the belief that some debts transcend time itself. And tonight, they'd come for one of their own, a girl who'd been fighting alone for far too long. Marcus Cole hadn't thought about the promise in years, not because he'd forgotten. You don't forget a debt like that, not when it's written in blood and last breaths, but because finding Sarah Mitchell had seemed impossible. The military had scattered the 4th Infantry across 3 continents. Records were classified, families moved, remarried, disappeared into the vast American landscape like ghosts. James Mitchell had saved his life during a supply depot riot near Tikrit, Iraq. April 17th, 2003. The date was burned into Marcus's memory like a brand. An ammunition crate had been improperly secured on a forklift. When the lift tipped during an insurgent mortar attack, the crate, weighing nearly 800 pounds, had come down like the wrath of God. James had thrown himself between Marcus and that crushing weight, taking the full impact across his spine and ribcage. The sound was something Marcus still heard in nightmares. The crack of vertebrae, the wheeze of punctured lungs, the way James's body had simply folded. He'd had maybe 90 seconds, 2 minutes at most. Marcus had cradled him in the Iraqi dust while medics scrambled and mortar rounds whistled overhead. James's lips were red with blood, his breathing shallow and wet, his eyes already glazing with the approach of something final and irreversible. "My daughter," James had gasped, each word a monumental effort, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. "Sarah, she's 7, just turned 7 last month. If anything happens to me, promise you'll watch over her. Promise me, Cole. Swear it on your life." Marcus had promised. He always kept his word. It was the code he lived by, the only law that mattered in a world where everything else could be negotiated or compromised. But the army had moved him to Afghanistan within a month. Then Germany. Then back stateside to Fort Bragg. He'd tried to find the Mitchells through official channels, but privacy laws blocked him. The family had moved from their base housing. No forwarding address, no phone number, just silence. Years became a decade, then two. The promise became a scar he carried silently, a weight pressing against his chest whenever he lay awake at 3 in the morning, wondering if he'd failed the only man who'd ever died for him. Then 3 weeks ago, on a cold October morning, a waitress at a truck stop outside Bloomfield, Indiana, had mentioned something in passing. She'd been complaining about her own troubles, the way people do when they're tired and broke, and she'd mentioned a regular customer, a single mother named Sarah Mitchell, who'd just been fired from her nursing job at the county hospital. Fired for missing too many shifts because her daughter was sick, heart problems, needed surgery, mother was facing eviction. Old town was talking about it, but nobody was helping because, well, people talk more than they act. The waitress didn't know why Marcus had gone perfectly still, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. She didn't know why he'd asked for the woman's full name, her address, her daughter's name. She didn't know that she'd just lit a fuse that had been waiting 22 years to burn. Marcus had made calls that same afternoon, found addresses through public records, cross-referenced ages and locations, confirmed military family background. It was her, James Mitchell's daughter, the girl he'd promised to protect. She was 31 years old now, single mother, broke, desperate, alone. Everything James had feared. Then Marcus had called his brothers and sisters in the Iron Covenant, a motorcycle club built not on crime, but on honor, composed entirely of veterans, first responders, and people who understood that loyalty wasn't just a word you tattooed on your arm. It was how you lived, how you died, how you kept promises even when the world forgot them. "We ride Thursday at dawn," he'd said simply into the phone. "James Mitchell's daughter, we're keeping the promise." Nobody asked questions. In the covenant, a debt of honor was sacred. You showed up. You did the work. You kept your word. That was the whole law and all the prophets. 47 members had answered the call, from Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Illinois. They'd converged on Bloomfield like an army mobilizing for war, except their weapons weren't guns. They were tools, checkbooks, medical connections, and the unshakable conviction that Sarah Mitchell would never fight alone again. Sarah's house was small and tired, the kind of structure that had given up trying to look respectable decades ago. It sat on Maple Street in the older part of Bloomfield, where the American dream had come to quietly die. Paint peeled from the shutters in long, curling strips like dead skin. The lawn needed mowing, had needed it for weeks, maybe months. One gutter hung loose, dangling like a broken arm. The front steps sagged in the middle from years of weight and weather. Through the window, Marcus could see a cramped living room illuminated by a single lamp, second-hand furniture covered in blankets to hide the tears and stains. Medical bills stacked on the coffee table in a mountain of white paper and red ink. A child's drawing taped to the wall, a house, a tree, 2 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. The kind of innocent art that breaks your heart when you know the child who drew it is dying. When Sarah opened the door, Marcus saw James Mitchell staring back at him across 22 years and an ocean of grief. Same eyes, that particular shade of blue-gray like storm clouds. Same determined set to the jaw. Same quiet strength buried under layers of exhaustion and desperation, and the kind of weariness that comes from fighting too long without reinforcements. She was small, maybe 5'4", wearing scrubs that had seen better years and a cardigan with holes in the elbows. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, dark circles under her eyes like bruises, hands that trembled slightly as she gripped the doorframe. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the idling motorcycles. "My father never mentioned anyone named Marcus Cole. He never said anything about—" He didn't have time to mention much. Marcus said gently, his voice softening in a way it rarely did. He had about 90 seconds after the crate hit him, but he used those seconds to make me swear I'd look after you if he couldn't, that I'd make sure you were safe, protected, never alone. He gestured to the wall of bikers behind him, 47 men and women standing in the November cold like soldiers at attention. We heard you've been fighting alone, fighting hard, fighting well, but alone. His voice hardened slightly, not with anger but with absolute conviction. That ends tonight, right now, this moment. Sarah's knees almost gave out. She gripped the doorframe harder, her knuckles going white, tears streaming down her face in rivulets that caught the porch light. I can't. I don't have money to pay you back. I'm 3 months behind on rent. The hospital is demanding $15,000 up front for Emma's surgery. I lost my job. I have $83 in my checking account and... This isn't about money. Marcus's voice cut through her panic like a knife through fog, firm but kind, the voice of someone who'd given orders in combat and knew how to command without cruelty. This is about honor. Your father gave his life for mine, threw himself in front of 800 pounds of ammunition to save a man he barely knew. The least I can do, the absolute minimum I owe him, is make sure his daughter and granddaughter are safe, healthy, and never have to fight alone again. Behind him, a woman with silver hair stepped forward. She was perhaps 60, lean and strong, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades saving lives. I'm Diana Reeves, retired registered nurse, 38 years in cardiac care. I heard your daughter needs surgery for a ventricular septal defect. She pulled a folder from inside her leather jacket, professional and prepared. I've already contacted 3 pediatric cardiac specialists at Riley Hospital in Indianapolis. All 3 have agreed to consult pro bono. Surgery, recovery, follow-up care, all covered. They're ready to schedule whenever you are. Another biker stepped forward, younger, maybe 35, with tattooed arms crossed over a broad chest. I'm Luis Mendoza. I own Mendoza Construction out of Indianapolis. Your roof is completely shot. I can see daylight through the shingles from here. Foundations cracked on the east side. Plumbing's probably original to the house, which means it's from the 70s and ready to fail. He pulled out his phone, already taking notes. We start repairs Friday morning. Full crew. No charge. One by one, they introduced themselves. Teachers offering free tutoring for Emma. Mechanics offering to fix Sarah's dying car. A lawyer specializing in tenant rights. An accountant to organize her finances. A social worker to navigate medical bureaucracy. Veterans who understood what it meant to honor a fallen brother. Each offering something Sarah desperately needed, something she'd been too proud or too broken to ask for. She couldn't stop crying, deep, shaking sobs that came from someplace ancient and wounded, the place where we store all the pain we're too strong to show the world. She slid down the doorframe until she was sitting on the threshold, her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving. Diana knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her back. It's okay to accept help, honey. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Sarah looked up, her face streaked with tears, her voice breaking. I've been so alone for so long. I forgot what this felt like. Marcus knelt on her other side, his voice rough with emotion he rarely showed. You're not alone anymore. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever again. That's the promise I made your father, and I've waited 22 years to keep it. By nightfall, Sarah's living room had transformed from a shrine to struggle into a command center for compassion. Diana had Emma's complete medical records spread across the coffee table like military intelligence reports, coordinating with surgeons via phone and email. Luis measured the roof damage with professional precision, his crew taking notes and photographs. Others assessed the plumbing, ancient galvanized pipes rusted through in places, the electrical panel that sparked when you touched certain switches, the cracked foundation that had been slowly destroying the house for decades. Emma herself, 8 years old with her father's dark curls and her mother's gentle smile, sat wide-eyed on the couch watching this invasion of kindness with something approaching wonder. She'd been weak for months, her congenital heart defect worsening steadily, stealing her energy and color and childhood one day at a time. But tonight, surrounded by these strange, loud people who treated her like family, who listened when she talked about her drawings and her favorite books and her fear of needles, she laughed for the first time in weeks, a real laugh. Not the careful, polite sound she made when adults tried too hard to cheer her up, but genuine joy. Marcus sat beside Sarah on the porch steps while the others worked inside, their boots heavy on the old floorboards, their voices warm and purposeful. The November air was sharp and clean, smelling of distant wood smoke and coming snow. "Why now?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice steadier now, but still fragile. "Why after all these years? You could have looked for me any time. 22 years is a long time to wait." Marcus was silent for a moment, staring at the street where his motorcycle sat among 46 others, a metal army at rest. "I tried," he said finally. "Right after your father died, I tried to find you and your mother, but the army moved me overseas within a month. Afghanistan first, then Germany, then back stateside, but nowhere near Fort Hood. I made inquiries through official channels, but privacy laws blocked me at every turn. Your mother had moved, remarried maybe, taken you somewhere I couldn't track without resources I didn't have." He turned to look at her, his scarred face honest and open in the dim light. "I thought about you every year on April 17th, the anniversary of your father's death. I'd wonder where you were, if you were okay, if I'd failed the only promise that mattered. It haunted me, but I couldn't find you. So what changed? A waitress at a truck stop mentioned your name 3 weeks ago, complained about how the town was gossiping about your troubles, but nobody was actually helping. Soon as I heard Sarah Mitchell and daughter with heart problems and Bloomfield, Indiana, I knew." His voice roughened with emotion. "I knew it was you. And I knew I'd finally been given a chance to make things right." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've been so alone. After Dad died, Mom couldn't cope. She started drinking. Blamed me somehow, like I was the reason he'd enlisted, the reason he died. She left when I was 12, just walked out one morning and never came back. I raised myself after that, foster care for a year, then emancipated at 16. I worked my way through nursing school, thought I'd built a decent life." Her voice cracked. "Then I had Emma, and her father stayed just long enough to empty our savings account and disappear. I thought I could handle it all. I'm a nurse. I'm strong. I've survived worse. But Emma's condition kept getting worse. The bills kept piling up. And I was drowning so slowly, I didn't even realize I couldn't breathe anymore." Marcus placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, the gesture both comforting and grounding. "You're not drowning anymore. Your father saved my life, and now I'm going to make sure his sacrifice meant something. You and Emma are going to be okay, not because of charity, not because of pity, but because honor demands it, and I've got 46 people behind me who believe the same thing." We're filming this story from Bloomfield, Indiana. It's 7:34 p.m. on a cold November evening, and the temperature just dropped to freezing. But inside this small house on Maple Street, something warm and powerful is being rebuilt. Comment below where you're watching from and if you've ever experienced unexpected kindness when you needed it most. The next morning arrived cold and bright, sunlight glinting off frost-covered grass. A black Mercedes sedan pulled up outside Sarah's house at precisely 9 o'clock, its paint job immaculate, its windows tinted dark. A man emerged wearing an expensive tailored suit, charcoal grey, probably worth more than Sarah's car, and Italian leather shoes that clicked against the cracked sidewalk like a countdown to judgment. Richard Voss, 48 years old, owner of Voss Properties LLC, Sarah's landlord for the past 3 years and the architect of her misery for the past 6 months. He stopped cold when he saw the motorcycles still parked along the street, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun, their presence undeniable and vaguely threatening despite their stillness. Marcus was under Sarah's ancient Honda Civic, replacing brake pads that had worn down to nothing. The car shouldn't have been on the road at all, dangerous to the point of criminal, but Sarah had no choice and no money. Marcus slid out from beneath the chassis slowly, deliberately grease coating his hands and forearms, his eyes locking onto Voss with the kind of focused intensity that made lesser men reconsider their life choices. "Can I help you?" Marcus's tone was polite. Barely. The way a wolf might be polite to a rabbit before remembering it's hungry. Voss's confidence, so carefully constructed and maintained through years of bullying vulnerable tenants, wavered visibly. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "I'm here to speak with Ms. Mitchell regarding overdue rent and—" "She's not home." Marcus stood slowly, rising to his full height of 6'3", his frame broad from decades of manual labor and military conditioning. "But I can take a message." "And who exactly are you?" "A friend, and you are Richard Voss, correct? Owner of Voss Properties. The same Richard Voss currently facing 17 tenant complaints with the County Housing Authority." Voss's face flushed red. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a legitimate businessman and Sarah owes you 3 months' rent plus late fees amounting to $4,200, which you're threatening to collect through eviction proceedings beginning today." Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, his movements casual, but his voice sharpening like a blade being drawn. "Do I have that right? She signed a lease. She agreed to the terms. If she can't pay—" "Unless what?" Diana appeared from the side of the house, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression dangerous despite her grandmotherly appearance. Behind her, 6 bikers casually assembled in a loose semicircle, their presence quiet but unmistakable. They didn't threaten, they didn't posture. They simply existed in a way that made threats unnecessary. Voss took an involuntary step backward, his expensive shoes scraping on concrete. "Unless she pays in full, by Friday, $4,200 or she's out." Marcus studied him for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable. Then he smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Voss. You're going to go back to your office in your expensive car, you're going to sit at your expensive desk, and you're going to review Sarah Mitchell's lease very carefully. When you do, you'll find that the rent increases you imposed over the past 18 months were illegal under Indiana Code, Title 32, Article 31, Chapter 3, which caps annual rent increases for month-to-month tenancies at 5% without 60 days written notice." Voss's face went from red to pale. "I don't know what—" "You increased her rent 18%, 3 separate times, without proper notice. You also charged late fees exceeding the statutory maximum and threatened eviction without following proper legal procedures. You did all this because you assumed Sarah Mitchell had no one to protect her. No family, no resources, no one who'd fight back." Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to something cold and final. "That assumption just became very expensive for you." Diana handed Voss a business card, her movements precise and professional. "That's my lawyer, David Chen, specializes in tenant rights and housing discrimination. He'll be calling you this afternoon. I suggest you clear your schedule." Luis emerged from the house, phone in hand, grinning like someone who'd just won the lottery. "Recorded the whole conversation," he announced cheerfully. "Nice and legal. Indiana's a one-party consent state. Beautiful thing about modern technology." Voss retreated to his Mercedes without another word, his hands shaking as he fumbled with his keys. As he drove away too fast, leaving rubber on the pavement, Sarah appeared in the doorway. "What just happened?" she asked, her voice small. "Justice," Marcus said simply. "Or the beginning of it, anyway." Emma's surgery was scheduled for Thursday morning at 6:30 a.m. at Riley Hospital for Children in Indianapolis, 90 minutes north. The hospital, a gleaming complex of glass and steel that rose from the Indiana landscape like a cathedral dedicated to the god of second chances, had agreed to cover the entire procedure after Diana's negotiations and a fundraiser the Iron Covenant organized overnight through social media and word of mouth. They'd raised $43,000 in 18 hours. Donations had poured in from veterans organizations, motorcycle clubs across 12 states, and ordinary people who'd heard the story and felt compelled to help. The money covered not just the surgery, but months of follow-up care, medications, physical therapy, and a trust fund for Emma's future medical needs. Sarah sat in the pre-op waiting room at 5:47 a.m., her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white and bloodless. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emma's small, pale face, imagined surgical complications, envisioned a world where her daughter didn't wake up. Marcus sat beside her in silence, his presence solid and unwavering. Around them, 20 Covenant members filled the available chairs, standing room, and hallway beyond, a human wall of support that made nurses and other families stare in confusion and awe. They'd ridden through the night to be here, arriving in waves of leather and chrome and loyalty. "What if something goes wrong?" Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "What if I lose her? She's all I have. She's everything." "Then we deal with it," Marcus said simply, his rough hand covering both of hers, together. "But she's strong, Sarah. She has your father's blood, Mitchell blood. That means she's a fighter." The surgeon, Dr. Helena Ortiz, emerged through the double doors at 6:15 a.m., wearing dark blue scrubs and an expression of professional calm. She was perhaps 45, with silver threading her black hair and steady hands that had saved hundreds of children. "Sarah, Emma's ready. We've reviewed all her scans and blood work. The ventricular septal defect is exactly where we expected, and we'll be repairing it using a pericardial patch. We'll also replace the mitral valve using a synthetic valve designed for pediatric patients that will grow with her." She knelt in front of Sarah, making eye contact, her voice gentle but confident. "The procedure will take 4 to 5 hours. It's major surgery, yes, but it's also routine for us. We do 3 or 4 of these every week. Emma's young, strong, and her heart tissue is healthy. Everything about her case says success." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat the size of her fist. Diana squeezed her hand. "We'll be right here every minute, not going anywhere." The hours that followed were simultaneously endless and instantaneous, time moving with the strange elasticity of crisis. Marcus paced the waiting room like a caged wolf, his boots wearing a path in the industrial carpet. Diana knitted, something complicated with multiple colors, her hands moving with meditative precision. Luis bought everyone terrible coffee from the vending machine, the kind that tastes like battery acid and regret. They waited the way families wait, anxious, hopeful, making bargains with gods they weren't sure existed, refusing to leave because presence is sometimes the only gift we have to offer. At 11:47 a.m., Dr. Ortiz returned, still in scrubs, pulling down her surgical mask to reveal a smile that lit up the entire waiting room like sunrise after the longest night of the year. "She's in recovery," the doctor announced, her voice warm with professional satisfaction. "The surgery went perfectly. Both repairs completed without complications. Her heart is functioning beautifully, strong rhythm, good output. She'll need 6 weeks of careful recovery and follow-up monitoring, but barring unforeseen circumstances, your daughter's going to live a completely normal, healthy life." Sarah collapsed into Marcus's arms, her sobs so deep and powerful they shook them both. He held her steady, this man who'd waited 22 years to keep a promise, his own eyes wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. Around them, 20 bikers stood and applauded, their rough hands creating thunder in the sterile hospital corridor, celebrating a victory more meaningful than any they'd won on battlefields or highways. Emma Mitchell would live. And sometimes, that's the only victory that matters. Over the next 2 weeks, while Emma recovered in the hospital under Diana's watchful supervision and Sarah learned to sleep through the night without nightmares, the house on Maple Street transformed from a monument to struggle into something approaching a home. Luis's construction crew descended like a benevolent army. They tore off the old roof in a single afternoon, the rotten shingles and water-damaged plywood hauling away in a dumpster the size of a small house. New underlayment went down, then architectural shingles guaranteed for 30 years. They replaced the sagging gutters, repaired the fascia boards, sealed the soffit vents against winter cold. The foundation took longer. They had to excavate the east side down to the footings, exposing cracks that had been slowly destroying the structure for decades. New concrete poured, steel reinforcement added, waterproofing membrane applied, work that should have cost $15,000 minimum, done free because Luis had served with Marcus in Afghanistan and understood that some debts transcend money. Inside, electricians rewired the worst circuits, replacing ancient knob-and-tube wiring that was a fire waiting for its moment. Plumbers ripped out galvanized pipes that had narrowed with rust to the diameter of straws, replacing them with modern PEX that would last another 50 years. A heating contractor serviced the ancient furnace, then quietly installed a new, high-efficiency unit because the old one wouldn't have survived another winter. The landscaping was Sarah's favorite part. A woman named Rosa Delgado, who owned a nursery in Indianapolis and whose son Marcus had saved from a roadside bomb in Kandahar, replanted the entire garden. Not lawn, gardens, raised beds filled with dark soil and promise. Perennials that would return year after year, rose bushes, tulip bulbs for spring. A small vegetable garden where Emma could grow tomatoes and learn that beautiful things come from patient work. A teacher from the Covenant named Michelle Warren painted Emma's bedroom while the girl was still in the hospital. Not plain walls, but murals. Wildflowers covering one wall, sunflowers, black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers. A meadow scene with butterflies and bees. A sky dotted with clouds shaped like animals. Work that would have cost hundreds, maybe thousands from a professional muralist, done free because Michelle's husband had died at Fort Hood in 2005, and she remembered what it felt like when strangers became family during grief. Sarah tried to help with the work, tried to contribute somehow, but they wouldn't allow it. "You've been working for years," Diana said firmly one afternoon, gently removing a paintbrush from Sarah's hand. "Fighting alone, carrying weight that would have crushed most people. Let us carry this load. You've earned rest." Emma recovered quickly, her color returning within days, her energy boundless within weeks. The surgery had literally saved her life, and she seemed to understand this in the way children sometimes understand profound things without words. She followed the bikers around like a devoted shadow, asking questions about their motorcycles and tattoos and the stories etched in their scars. They answered patiently, these rough men and women who'd seen terrible things and chosen to create beauty anyway, teaching her that strength comes in many forms, and family is what you build, not what you're born into. One evening in early December, with snow just beginning to fall in fat, lazy flakes, Marcus found Sarah on the newly repaired porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the sunset painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough. It doesn't cover what you've done, what all of you have done." "You don't have to thank us," Marcus said, settling into the chair beside her, his leather jacket creaking. "But I do. My whole life I thought strength meant doing everything alone, not asking for help, not showing weakness, not admitting when you're drowning because that meant failure." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the sunset. "You taught me that's not strength. That's just fear wearing strength's clothing. Real strength is letting people in, accepting help, building family from loyalty instead of blood." Marcus nodded slowly, considering his words. "Your father taught me the same thing. The night he saved me, I was convinced I could handle everything myself. Solo operator, self-sufficient, didn't need anyone. He showed me that real courage isn't refusing help. It's accepting that we're stronger together than we'll ever be alone." Sarah smiled through fresh tears, the good kind that come from gratitude instead of grief. "He would have liked you. A lot." "I think he did. In those 90 seconds we had together, I think he saw something in me worth trusting with his daughter's future." Marcus's voice roughened with emotion. "I just hope I've honored that trust." "You have," Sarah whispered, "more than you'll ever know. If this story is touching your heart, if you believe in the power of promises kept and families chosen, hit that like button. It helps us share more stories of hope, honor, and the kind of love that changes everything." Richard Voss's legal troubles escalated with the inexorable momentum of an avalanche. Diana's lawyer, David Chen, filed a class-action lawsuit within 48 hours of their encounter, representing 12 tenants Voss had systematically exploited over the past 5 years. The complaint ran to 47 pages of documented abuse, illegal rent increases, improper eviction procedures, failure to maintain habitable conditions, retaliatory conduct against complainants, and a pattern of targeting vulnerable single mothers because they were least likely to fight back. The local news picked up the story within days. Channel 8 ran a 6-minute investigative piece featuring interviews with 3 former tenants, one of whom had been evicted while undergoing chemotherapy. The Indianapolis Star published a front-page article titled "Predatory Landlord Targeted the Vulnerable." Social media exploded with outrage. Within a week, the Indiana Attorney General's office announced a criminal investigation into Voss Properties LLC for fraud, extortion, and violations of the state's Fair Housing Act. The county revoked his rental licenses pending investigation. His properties were placed under receivership, his business accounts frozen, his expensive car repossessed. He showed up at Sarah's house one last time on a grey December afternoon, desperate and diminished, a man watching his empire collapse in real time. "Please," he said, his arrogance completely gone, replaced by naked fear. His suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes red from lack of sleep or crying or both. "Please just talk to them. Tell them to drop the charges. I'll forgive all your back rent. I'll pay for your daughter's medical bills. I'll give you the house, deed it to you free and clear. Just please make this stop." Sarah stood in her doorway, Marcus behind her, Diana beside her, 20 Covenant members visible through windows and on the lawn. She looked at this man who'd made her life hell for 6 months, who'd threatened to put her dying daughter on the street, who'd preyed on her vulnerability because he could. "No," she said, her voice steady and cold as winter steel. "You preyed on people when they were at their weakest. You threatened to destroy families because it was profitable and easy. You exploited vulnerability as a business model because you thought we had no one to protect us. No one to fight back, no one who cared enough to make you pay. She stepped closer and Voss actually flinched. You don't get forgiveness, you don't get mercy, you get exactly what you deserve, justice. And I hope every single day of your sentence reminds you why cruelty has consequences. Marcus said nothing, just stood behind her like a wall, his presence speaking volumes. Voss left without another word, climbing into a rusted Toyota that replaced his Mercedes, driving away with the heavy knowledge that some debts can never be forgiven, only paid in full. 2 weeks later, he was sentenced to 18 months in the county jail for fraud and extortion, followed by 5 years probation and permanent prohibition from operating rental properties in Indiana. His victims received restitution totaling $137,000 from the liquidation of his assets. Sarah didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. But she slept peacefully for the first time in years, knowing that she'd stood her ground and won. That vulnerability wasn't weakness when you had family to protect you, and that sometimes the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice because good people force it to bend. On a cold Saturday morning in mid-December, with fresh snow covering Bloomfield in pristine white and the temperature hovering just below freezing, Marcus gathered the full Iron Covenant at Sarah's house, all 47 members who'd answered the call, plus another 30 who'd heard the story and wanted to be present for the conclusion. The repairs were complete. The house stood solid and warm, smoke rising from the chimney, the roof intact, the foundation secure. Emma was healthy, running through the snowy yard with 2 neighbor children and a golden retriever someone had given her for Christmas. Her laughter bright and clear in the cold air, her heart strong and whole. Sarah had started a new job at Riley Hospital in Indianapolis. Better pay, better hours, working in pediatric cardiac care because she wanted to help other families facing what she'd survived. She drove there in a used but reliable Honda CR-V that Luis had found and the Covenant had purchased together, each member contributing what they could. Marcus stood on the porch addressing his family, his breath forming clouds that dispersed slowly in the still air. 22 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. I made a promise to a dying man in the desert outside Tikrit. Staff Sergeant James Mitchell threw himself in front of 800 pounds of falling ammunition to save my life. He had 90 seconds after impact, 90 seconds where he could have been thinking about his pain, his fear, his approaching death. But he didn't think about those things. He thought about his daughter. Marcus's voice roughened with emotion. He made me swear I'd watch over her, that I'd make sure she was never alone, never vulnerable, never without family. I promised him I would. And for 22 years, I thought I'd failed that promise. I couldn't find Sarah, couldn't protect her, couldn't keep my word to the man who died for me. He looked across the assembled bikers, these men and women who dropped everything to answer his call. But standing here today, seeing what we've built together, not just a repaired house, but a restored family, I realized the promise wasn't just about protecting one girl. It was about proving that honor still matters in a cynical world. That loyalty isn't just a word we tattoo on our skin, but a code we live by. That family isn't defined by blood, but by who shows up when the world falls apart. He turned to Sarah, who stood beside Emma, both bundled in winter coats, both healthy and whole and surrounded by love. James Mitchell would be proud of you, Sarah. You survived things that would have broken most people. You raised a beautiful daughter alone. You fought with everything you had, even when you had nothing left to fight with. And you taught me that the promise I made wasn't about charity or pity. It was about recognizing strength and honoring it. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the tears freezing on her cheeks. You didn't just save me and Emma. You reminded me what my father stood for: honor, loyalty, family, sacrifice. And you showed my daughter that heroes aren't just in storybooks. They're real. They wear leather jackets. They ride steel horses. They keep promises even when the world forgets them. They show up when you're drowning and they pull you to shore, and they stay until you remember how to breathe. She looked at the assembled covenant, 77 men and women standing in the snow, their motorcycles lined up like a metal army. Thank you for teaching us what family really means. Not blood, not obligation, but choice, love, loyalty. The decision to stand with someone when standing alone would be easier. The Covenant responded with a roar, engines starting in synchronized thunder, the sound rolling across Bloomfield like a storm of chrome and gasoline and unbreakable promises. The noise shook windows. Startled birds from trees announced to the world that some things still mattered, that honor wasn't dead, that family was what you built with your choices. Emma ran to Marcus, wrapping her small arms around his waist, her face pressed against his leather jacket. Thank you for saving us, Uncle Marcus. He knelt in the snow, bringing himself eye-level with this child he'd promised to protect before she was born, this living proof that promises transcend time. Thank you for letting me keep my word, sweetheart. Your grandfather was the bravest man I ever knew, and you're just like him. Spring came to Bloomfield with the sudden violence of Midwestern weather, winter to summer in what felt like a single afternoon. Sarah's garden exploded with color. The rose bushes Diana had planted bloomed in shades of red and pink and yellow. The tulips Rosa had promised pushed through dark soil like small miracles. Tomatoes grew in the vegetable patch, green fruit swelling toward ripeness. Emma ran through the yard every evening after school, her energy boundless, her heart whole and strong. She'd made friends with every neighbor within 3 blocks. She'd started piano lessons with Michelle. She talked constantly about becoming a doctor when she grew up, wanting to fix hearts like Dr. Ortiz had fixed hers. Sarah worked 4 10-hour shifts at Riley Hospital, loving every exhausting moment. She'd found her calling in pediatric cardiac care, using her own experience to comfort terrified parents, to hold their hands during surgery, to promise them that fear was normal, but hope was stronger. She'd created a support group for families facing congenital heart defects, meeting monthly in the hospital cafeteria, sharing stories and strategies and the kind of hard-won wisdom that only comes from surviving. Marcus visited often, sometimes alone, sometimes with Diana or Luis or other Covenant members. He was family now, officially, legally, irrevocably. Sarah had asked him to be Emma's godfather in a small ceremony that spring, standing in the garden while a chaplain who rode with the Covenant spoke about chosen family and sacred bonds. One warm evening in May, Sarah asked him the question she'd been holding for months. What if you hadn't found us? What if that waitress had never mentioned my name? What if you'd spent the rest of your life not knowing I needed help? Marcus considered this, his scarred face thoughtful in the golden light of late afternoon. They sat on the porch, newly repaired, freshly painted, watching Emma practice riding the bicycle Luis had given her for her 9th birthday. Then I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if I'd failed your father, he said finally, wondering if his sacrifice meant anything, wondering if promises made in blood are just words we tell ourselves to feel honorable. He paused, watching Emma circle the driveway, her training wheels recently removed, her confidence growing with each lap. But I did find you, against all odds, against 22 years of silence and distance, and I learned something important. What? That promises don't have expiration dates. Honor doesn't fade with time. Loyalty isn't convenient or conditional. And the people worth fighting for are always worth finding, even if it takes decades, even if the search seems impossible. His voice softened. Your father gave his life for mine in 90 seconds. The least I could do was spend 22 years making sure that sacrifice meant something eternal. Sarah hugged him tightly. This man who'd saved her family not with money or charity, but with honor, loyalty, and the unshakable conviction that some promises must be kept regardless of cost. "Thank you for not giving up," she whispered. "Thank you for letting us in," he replied. As the sun set over Bloomfield, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, the Iron Covenant gathered one last time in Sarah's driveway. Not for repairs or protection, but for celebration. They grilled burgers and hot dogs, told stories that made Emma laugh until her sides hurt, taught her basic motorcycle maintenance, letting her feel like one of them, sang happy birthday 2 months early because she'd asked and they couldn't say no to her. Emma sat on Marcus's motorcycle, a 1998 Harley-Davidson Softail he'd rebuilt himself, pretending to rev the engine, her helmet too large, her smile radiant enough to light the whole neighborhood. This was the promise fulfilled. Not just survival, but joy. Not just safety, but love. Not just a debt repaid, but a family forged in fire and loyalty, and the belief that honor matters more than convenience. James Mitchell had saved Marcus's life 22 years ago in an Iraqi desert, using his last breaths to extract a promise that seemed impossible. Tonight, Marcus had saved James's legacy, his daughter, his granddaughter, his belief that some men keep their word no matter how long it takes or how impossible the task seems. And some promises, once made in blood and love and honor, echo forever across time and distance and death itself, connecting us to something larger than ourselves, something eternal and unbreakable. Family, loyalty, honor, the things that make us human, the things worth dying for, the things worth living for. Thank you for watching this story of honor, loyalty, and the sacred power of keeping your word even when the world forgets. If you believe in the strength of chosen family, in promises that transcend time, in the quiet courage of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories that remind us what it means to be truly human. See you in the next one, and remember, the best family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one that shows up when you need them most.